right, hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and just doing a quick little introduction here. What's going to follow is a great interview I did with Cesar Barta from Spain, Madrid, Spain, and he's a world's expert on the Sudarium of Oviedo, and he's actually written a recent book on the Sudarium. And so I invited him, and he was kind enough to come onto my show to speak about his very detailed research. Even the Shroud skeptic Hugh Ferry wrote a blog on it, and you can find the link for free on my realseekerministries.wordpress.com blog there to do your research as to what Hugh says. Um, and even he admits, yeah, it's very thorough and very honest research. So he respects Caesar's work in terms of studying the Sudarium of Oviedo scientifically and historically, and then how that links to the Shroud of Turin. So I was lucky enough to have Caesar on, and he gave me an interview and sort of answered some of the questions related to the research in his book. And just so you know, so the book is available on Amazon. It just came out May 26, 2022. It's called The Sudarium of Oviedo, Signs of Jesus Christ's Death. And it's probably the best book on the Sudarium out there, and it's linked to the Shroud of Turin. That's available by César Barta, who I had on, as well as people who are familiar with my Shroud Boys series, Giulio Fonte. He was an editor of this book as well. So, yeah, this is all some great stuff, and I'll include the link, the Amazon link to his book. So please support César and go and buy his book. It is a little expensive, but it's worth it. It's probably the most comprehensive look at the Sudarium. So, yeah, with that said, just so you know, in terms of the interview, so I'm doing the prelude here. Obviously, with César Barta, he's from Madrid, Spain. So English is not, just as with Giulio Fonte, when he was on the show, English is not his native language. So it's not really I couldn't do a debate or discussion, with César and Hugh kind of interacting with each other, the pro Shroud César and then the Shroud skeptic like Hugh Ferry. So it was more just a straightforward interview, and I sent him the questions in advance. You'll see the questions up on my blog site, so you'll see what I'm asking. César also very kindly offered to send me his written responses. So, if you're not exactly sure exactly what he's answering in some cases, just because of the language barrier, you can go and read with your own eyeballs his written response to see, and that's what he was using to provide his answers. So that way we have some various means for you guys to understand what the answers are, thankfully. So yeah, with that said, I'm going to shut up and go straight to the show. I just want to say thank you again so much to César for being on the show and sharing his vast knowledge about the Sudarium of Oviedo and its link to the Shroud of Turin. All right, enjoy the show. All right, hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and today I have a really special treat for you guys. I have a special guest, César Barta. Hey, César, welcome to the show.
Hello, and many thanks to give me the opportunity to share the explanation of the research about the Sudarium.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on because we're going to be talking about specifically the Sudarium of Oviedo and your research on that. You've written a new book and how that's linked to the Shroud of Turin. So I think what I first want to do is just turn it over straight to you to kind of introduce us as to who you are. How did you get involved in studying the Sudarium and the Shroud? And if you don't mind, give us a little bit about your faith journey as well.
Okay, well, I learned about the Shroud of Turin much before to know of the Sudarium. My involvement on the Sudarium came only years after. For my involvement on the Shroud of Turin, an important event was when I was a student of physics in the university, more than 40 years ago. I attended a lecture in 1976 in the university. It was before the in situ analysis of the shroud. However, the 3D images become already famous. The lecture impressed me because the accumulated evidences. But I forget it for years. Only in 1988, when the carbon dating was released, and I had finished my study of physics, I realized that there was a contradiction that I could analyze as a physicist. There was a contradiction between the previous studies and the result of carbon-14 dating. So in this time, I tried to solve the contradiction, and I still work on it. My interest for the shroud was much more scientific than religious. I was a believer before to know about the shroud. The shroud studies don't play an important role in my faith. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. All right, cool. So as I kind of told the audience here, you've written a new book about specifically the Sudarium of Oviedo. So just moving on to question 2, for those who don't know about the Sudarium or what that's about, do you mind just giving us sort of a general introduction as to what the Sudarium of Oviedo is and how that might relate to the Gospels a bit?
Okay. Well, the Sudarium of Oviedo is a cloth with the size of a towel. It was used to cover the face of a corpse of a man with beard and mustache who died in a right position. Some bloody fluid leaked from his mouth and nose. This fluid was the result of a traumatic injury that induced a pulmonary edema. The head of the corpse showed injuries caused by sharp objects such as a crown of thorns. It was the Sudarium was stitched to the hair and kept for about 2 hours and then removed and sprinkled with aloe and a succedaneum of myrrh. It was not a chin band. And about the relationship with the gospel, there is a mention of the Sudarium that was in the sepulchre of Christ. It is the Gospel of St. John in the chapter 20. The Sudarium that has covered his head. Wait. Wait a minute.
No problem.
I was a little lost.
Are you trying to share your screen or?
Okay, but covered his head, not with not the burial cloth, but rolled up in a separate place. This is the sentence in the gospel. The Sudarium of Oviedo could be that of the gospel. Okay.
Awesome, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we know what the Sudarium is. So it's this purported head cloth mentioned in the Gospel of John. Okay, so what do we know in terms of the historical provenance of the Sudarium itself? Are we able to trace this back to the 1st century, Jerusalem, and to Jesus? And what's some of the liturgy surrounding the Sudarium?
Okay, well, sorry, but to ask for traces of relics of Christ back to the 1st century, I think is out of the contest. There is no relic of Christ that can be traced back to the life of Christ. In fact, it is scarce the existence of traces that go back to the life of any historical characters. Most of the documentation is centuries after their life. And in the case of the Christian, at the 1st century and until the 5th century, the Christians were not worried about the relic, but they were worried about their life. Only when the Christianity could be celebrated in public the pilgrimage began, and pilgrims asked for traces or for relic. In the case of the Sudarium, the standard hypothesis is that it arrived in Oviedo inside the Holy Ark. Since 1075, there is a reference to a Sudarium in Oviedo. Before 1075, the trace is for the Holy Ark, because the Sudarium was inside the Holy Ark and the Holy Ark was not open until that day. There are several documents that have some reliability that trace the Holy Ark back to the 7th century. Then there are mention of the Sudarium of Christ, not the Sudarium of Oviedo, the mention of the Sudarium of Christ in the Near East, previously in the 5th century by, for example, Nonus of Panopolis, and in the 6th century by pilgrims under the patronage of Saint Antonio of Piacenza. In relationship with the liturgy, since ancient times, a holy votive mass was celebrated in honor of the Holy Sudarium, but it was suspended in the 17th century, and it was recovered in the 2007.
Okay.
Also, since the 16th century, there are 3 days in the year that the Sudarium is venerated in the cathedral of Oviedo.
All right, awesome. Okay, cool. So I think what you're saying is with the Sudarium, it's dated back to 1075 AD, and when it becomes associated with the Ark, and then we can trace that back further. Is that correct?
Wait a minute, sorry.
Okay.
Wait, I remarked that the previous history of the Sudarium is linked to the Holy Ark, but we actually didn't know when the Sudarium was put inside the Holy Ark.
Okay.
Then the all history of the Sudarium is not so clear as after 1075.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, cool. So
sorry, do you understand me more? English is enough to be understand?
I think so. Yeah, more or less. It's pretty good. I might need to like just go back and re-listen a bit, but for the most part, you're doing great.
Well,
yeah, awesome. All right, so question 4 then. This is kind of linking the Sudarium to the geographical area of Jerusalem or Israel. What about the pollen studies that have been done on the Sudarium? What have they shown in terms of the pollen studies and that sort of thing?
Okay, for an introduction to the pollen studies, there were 3 main studies of the pollen of the Sudarium. The first was performed by Max Frey, known by the researchers of the Shroud. And he provided the genus and the species for a geographical location target. The second study was performed by Carmen Ferreras, a member of the research team of the Spanish Centro of Sindonology. She provided the genus and the species as well. The last was performed by Marcia Boy, also from the research team of the Spanish Centro of Sindonology, with result for the use of the Sudarium, not for geographical location. Okay. This is enough for an introduction of the pollen.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Perfect. And did you mention the 2016 boy study there?
The 2016. Mm-hmm. Okay. I would like to. There are some criticisms from Hatfari that he read my book exhaustively. Then I would like to thank Hatfari for reading my book in this way and doing such a good review. He contributed to the improvement of the knowledge of the Sudarium of Oviedo. However, Hat is known as a skeptic about the authenticity of the Shroud, and now also about the authenticity of the Sudarium of Oviedo. As a skeptic, he stresses the problem against the authenticity and sometimes denies even the most conclusive evidence to avoid affecting the authenticity. There is always a subjective contribution to decide if a relic can be authentic or not. Regarding the pollen, I have no reason to doubt about the studies of Matt Frey and Carmen Ferreras. They both identified genus and species of several pollens. Some of them were found by both, and others were found only by one of these specialists. Although Carmen Ferreras did not find any species of pollen which does not grow in Spain, Frey did it, and one of the species found by Frey in the Sudarium, as well as in the Shroud, grows in Israel and does not grow in Spain or Europe. It is shown support for the presence of the Sudarium and Shroud in Israel. If someone is bothered by it, he is free to doubt on it. Most Frey's samples are still available. If someone proves that the grain does not correspond to the Acacia avidia species that prove the presence in the Israel, we will discard this support. But for the moment, we can rely on it.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. So just so the audience knows, he was responding to a review by Hugh Ferry. So that's what he was responding to. So awesome. All right. So Cesar, I want to ask you, there's a kind of a similar study in question 5 here about the analysis of the limestone found on the Sudarium. What do we know from the limestone studies?
Okay. This was an analysis that it was involved in directly. Analysis with X-ray fluorescence was performed along the Sudarium of Oviedo. It was a non-destructive test that allowed us to know some chemical element present of the Sudarium. It detected the presence of elements typical of dust, as the calcium and strontium. This same type of test was previously performed on the Shroud in 1978. There was a significant difference between concentration of elements of the bloody areas and in the cleaner ones. We found an unexpected high amount of calcium or dust close to the tip of the nose. And about the criticism, if the dust could came from other place than the Israel or Jerusalem and from and different from Oviedo, we have to take in mind that there are 3 types of conservation of relic in general in the history of relic or relics. We can differentiate between along the history that during its original use, in this case at the for the Sudarium as a burial cloth. There are other time that is during its veneration veneration as a relic in the antiquity until about the 13th century. And finally, there are a third period during the veneration after the 13th century. That and contamination came mainly during the first and original use. Later, when the relics were kept in the Byzantine culture or ancient Christians, relics were rarely shown. The ancient Christian thought that they did not deserve to see the sacred relics, and these were kept hidden from the eyes. The relics were inside non-transparent reliquaries that were not opened except for exceptional veneration. It is only after the 13th century that the attitude toward relics changed and people wished to see them. Therefore, the dust found on the Sudarium should come from the burial place. A contamination before the 13th century is not probably, because the documentation said that the Sudarium was inside the Holy Ark. If the Sudarium was in Spain, in another place different from the Oviedo, it will be inside the Ark, and it was not being contaminated. The dust found in the bloody stained areas of the Sudarium was fixed to the cloth by the bloody fluid and tell us of the site of its use as a burial cloth. Gotcha. The rate strontium to calcium in these areas is compatible with the dust of the Calvary. We can only say that.
All right, gotcha. Perfect.
Well,
oh, go ahead.
Something more.
Sure.
We realize that the X-ray fluorescence test can be improved. However, the relative concentration of calcium remain valid because any heterogeneity cannot be attributed to the table as a support of the Sudarium during the test, but the heterogeneity must come from the Sudarium. The unexpected high concentration of dust close to the tip of the nose remains true, and it matches with the same singularity of the shroud in the same spot.
Gotcha. Yeah, I wanted to throw it open to you. So once again, our mutual friend Hugh Ferry has kind of given his skeptical take on these limestone studies. What did you make of some of the main criticisms that Hugh leveled at this limestone and dust findings?
Yes, as I said, there are criticism or problems always with the result of the research, but always there are a subjective approach, and then the evidence of the concentration close to the tip of the nose remain, and it is a strong evidence that Sudarium and Shroud what on the same head, because it's strange that there was a high quantity of dust in this anatomical place. Then I think it's still valid, the conclusion.
Awesome, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to question 6 now. This is really the elephant in the room in terms of the dating of the Sudarium, and that's the fact that the Sudarium has been carbon dated, just like the Shroud. Not just once, but 4 times, which was surprising for me. But do you want to tell us about the carbon dating? What were the results and what happened with the carbon dating?
Okay, well, first of all, although there are 4 times, only we consider 3 because the 4 was in a heated sample, and this is not valid as a reliable sample.
Okay.
But the carbon dating of the Sudarium can be true, but in this case, a contradiction arises, as in the case of the Shroud. The type of death of the man of the Sudarium in upright position is compatible only with crucifixion. This penalty was no longer in use in the 8th century. Other clue, the note in the Sudarium indicated but Nonos of Panopolis in the 15th century correspond with the Sudarium of Oviedo and discard the carbon-14 dating. Well, what about the hypothesis of Barta of neutron absorption? From the point of view of the physics, the neutron absorption hypothesis is correct. If the Shroud and the Sudarium receive a neutron irradiation, the result of the carbon dating will be younger than the true age. However, when this hypothesis is proposed, usually people ask for where the neutron come. I answer that is not the question for the moment. The question is, can we detect if the Shroud and the Sudarium receive a neutron irradiation? If we found a test that can confirm or discard the neutron irradiation, we will ask for the origin of the neutron irradiation if the result of the test were positive.
All right. One thing I'm curious about is what did they find in terms of the gradient of the dating of the samples? Like what were the findings there, and how does that relate to Bob Rucker's hypothesis?
The question was about the
gradient of the dates.
Okay. Well, this is is a clue that the source of the irradiation came from the body, but it can be, at least in the case of the Sudarium, the difference between the 3 dating is compatible with the incertitude of the test. Then is not a strong proof that the irradiation came from the point, from the body, no? But if the irradiation, the neutron irradiation came from the body, the distribution of carbon-14 must be as we found in the different dating tests.
Awesome. All right. So kind of moving from the
wait. I would like to add that we tried to find a test that can confirm the neutron irradiation, but for the moment, research at Thomas McAvoy followed this approach. The problem is that he proposed a test destructive, and it's not easy to allow this kind of test, no, for a relic. But maybe in the future we can find an alternative test to confirm or discard if there was a neutron irradiation on this relic.
Gotcha. Perfect. Yeah, I think they've been working. Bob Rucker has a series of tests, non-invasive tests and stuff like that as well. So okay, so I want to move on from looking at the historicity or the provenance of the shroud to the scientific facts, because obviously that's where you specialize in and everything, especially. So what are some of the scientific and forensic findings and studies that have been done on the Sudarium, including its blood stains, and what does that tell us about what happened?
Well, the result of the research was that the Sudarium of Oviedo was put around the head of a corpse who died upright almost an hour before the use of the Sudarium of him. And as I said, the man has experimented a traumatic injury that induced a pulmonary edema. The Sudarium was stitched to the lock of the hair of the back of the neck and was rolled out, covering the face. When the cloth reached the opposite cheek, the Sudarium was folded back to pass again in front of the face. Then there were 2 layers covering the face. In this way, he remained about almost an hour. Then he was taken down and put face down for another hour, more or less. Finally, the Sudarium was unfolded and passed all around the head. So the corpse was moved for a while and the Sudarium was removed from the head. In summary, since the death to the entombment, there an interval of 3 hours more or less. This is the sequence we can obtain from the research.
Gotcha. So that's the sequence that would have happened with the corpse. Oh, okay. So I think we're coming to question 8, and this is the most important question for us as pro-shroud proponents. So, okay, great. So we've got these findings about the Sudarium. How on earth do we link the Sudarium with the Shroud of Turin?
Okay, well, there are geometrical and physiological coincidence between Sudarium of Oviedo and Sudarium of Turin. Both of them were used for on a man with beard and mustache. The size of the anatomical characteristic, as the nose or the forehead, are compatible each other. A strong evidence is the wounds of the crown of thorns, this exclusive penalty for Jesus Christ. They match in a high percentage. Moreover, there is a drop of blood which half appear in the shroud and the other half of this drop appear in the Sudarium. Moreover, both of them have shown an unexpected concentration of that close to the tip of the nose, as I said. Some odd characteristic of the shroud can be explained if the man of the shroud used the Sudarium of Oviedo. These characteristics are the so-called ponytail of the hair and the lock along the cheek. Maybe we can share a presentation to make easy understand the use of the Sudarium.
Yep, go ahead. You can share your screen.
Okay.
Yep. There it is.
Okay. This is the. Do you know? No? Do you see?
I do see it. It's Jesus on the cross, and then,
okay. Then, when the corpse of a man was upright and died an hour before, the Sudarium of Oviedo was put around the head. Mm. This is a more clear showing of the arrangement. And now we can see how this was put maybe in this way. You see it?
Yep, yep. Upside, yep.
Okay. The red line simul the Sudarium, no? And they, by this moving, we can understand where was the face and where was the nape.
Okay.
You know, you see? Do you see?
Yep, it's drawn up.
Okay. This part of the face was the forehead, and this part was the nose and the mouth.
Okay.
And this part was the nape. This is the lock of hair in the back of on the neck. Okay. And these are the bones of the crown of thorn.
Okay.
Okay, this maybe it is difficult to see, but this drop of blood is only the half of the drop, because in the middle of this drop there are no quantity of blood, and in the shroud there are the other part of this drop when the face of both cloth are matched. Okay, this may do easy to understand.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the Sudarium, when the course was upright, all the stain below the nose was performed, where arrived the stain of the bloody stain arrived when below the nose, when the curve was upright. But after that, the curve was put face down, and in this moment, the above the nose, the forehead stain became in place. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Then the coincidence. This is the outline of the stain in the Sudarium of Oviedo, and at the left there are images of the Shroud of Turin, and the clear is the whitest part are more or less the blood, the blood. Then we turn a little the okay, sorry.
No problem.
When we put this outline on the face of the shroud, this part matches with the epsilon, and this is the drop of blood that is the half in the Sudarium and the other half in the shroud. And the eyebrows here correspond to this part, and the size of the nose is more or less the same. The quantity of blood around the nose and the mouth, mustache, and beard is present also in the Sudarium. Okay? This is a closer detail of the drop that is in the shroud, but without the middle of the drop. Only we have in the shroud only we see around the drop, but not in the middle of the drop. And this drop is present in the Sudarium of Oviedo. And now, before mentioning the concentration of dust close to the tip of the nose. At the right, we see the test of the shroud in 1978. And there was a high concentration of dust just in this point. And the 3 points in the Sudarium of Oviedo that correspond to the same point, anatomical point of the face, also show the highest concentration of dust. This is not expected. It's an unexpected finding. Dust in the nose. Okay, I think this is enough to understand my research. And now we can follow with the last question, no?
Yeah, so this is great. You've been showing us how you think the Sudarium is linked to the Shroud of Turin. But once again, we have our good friend, the Shroud skeptic Hugh Ferry, and he's tried to argue that, well, actually, no, there are problems with this. You know, it's only the same relative position. You have to manipulate things. So, how do you respond to some of the criticisms of people like Hugh Ferry to this link between the Shroud and the Sudarium?
Yes, if there are match or there are no matches or coincidence, have a component of subjectivity. To avoid the subjective opinion on the coincidence of the bone, we applied the objective software to find the best coincidence. And it confirmed the previous result. In the book, appeared the simulation with one of my daughter. The simulation of the crown of thorn. The cloth used for the simulation receives a stain of the drop that simulate the crown of thorn in the same area as in the shroud and in the Sudarium. But the distribution of the stain of the simulation does not match with the distribution of the stain in the two relics. It proves that a random distribution does not match. If there is coincidence, and the objective software proved it that there was coincidence, if they are coincident, is because the drop came from the same head.
Gotcha.
Well, in the last number of the Friend magazine, Montrent nous ton visage, that I received just today, there is more detail of this explanation with the simulation of my daughter.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Yeah. Well, so I think you've kind of answered all the questions that I had on my list here. Is there anything else that I've missed or didn't ask you about that you want to share about what you've learned on the Sudarium there? So question 10.
Well, only a last thing, maybe it's worth to remark that people and bishop did not understand what they saw in the Sudarium. They saw in the veneration, they saw it, the cloth turned 90 degrees with respect to the natural way to see a face. Then this discard the fake, because if there is a fake, it's necessary to understand what you see. And in this case, people didn't understand the Sudarium for centuries and centuries. Only the science discovered the true use of the Sudarium, and the result of the analysis did not discard the authenticity, but rather support it. This is all.
Gotcha. All right. Just one follow-up question before I close out, if it's okay. Uh, in terms of the link between the Sudarium and the Shroud of Turin, how confident are you that these two things covered the same corpse? Like a percentage or something?
Well, I mm, I give a height probability of coincidence because the a single test is not enough, but when we cumulate all the tests, the probability to be different the probability to be used in two different persons became very low. Then there is a high probability that the two clothes were used on the same person.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, with that said, that covers all the questions. I want to say thank you so much for coming on. I hope, did you enjoy your time? Do you feel you got to present the best case here?
Okay, a lot. I again give you many thanks for this opportunity. I was so proud to participate and share this research.
Awesome. Awesome. No, you're welcome back anytime you'd like to present on my show. So yeah, with that said, I want to say thank you again to Cesar. I hope that the audience enjoyed this show. And with that, I'll say have a great week, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.